You don't do any of your own marketing, do you? I'm joking. We all do, right?
Yeah.
It's fun.
Nice. No open questions yet. Come on, audience. Like at this point, we totally expect questions.
All right. So I got the live stream up and running. It's 1 o'clock, so I'm gonna post it, and then I can get kicked off. So thanks everybody for being patient. As always, just takes a moment at the beginning to get these started. Something like LinkedIn is a good place to post it, right? Join us now on. Oh, and you gotta do some hashtags too, because that's always,
How people find stuff.
Info, and then we'll be done. Thanks. All right, cool. I will stop now. Posted, tagged you guys. There's a live stream as well to the Zoom session, right? So people can view it afterwards. I'll hop in and I will share my screen and we can get started. It should be a good time today. So, and it looks like we already have some chat going on. Thanks for posing your questions. So real quick, intention isn't to do too much from a slide deck perspective, but this is Blumira's Security Advisor series, and we're gonna be talking about detecting lateral movement. And with us, we have Haroon Mir from Thanks Canary. Thanks for joining us today, Haroon.
Yes, welcome.
Is there anything you want to mention? I mean, I don't know, people might consider you the godfather of honeypots. You've certainly done some other projects along fishing and other things, but yeah, would just love to get a high level, if you want to, introduction as far as the fun things you like to work on.
So mainly what we do, thanks for having me. Mainly what we do is honeypots. For the most part, what we pitch as is easy ways to detect badness on your networks. And so it's with honeypots, with honey token type stuff. And so pretty much all we do nowadays is Canary and Canary tokens. But what we super focused on, like the thinking behind that tech is are there ways that defenders can really get better leverage? So to detect badness on their network without lots of effort, without lots of false positives. And for today's discussion, yeah, it's one of the things we love. We think honeypots are in that sweet spot where you can put in really low amounts of effort for oversized results. And I have not cut my hair since the pandemic began, and this is what you're all now exposed to.
I think you're winning between the beard and the head of hair.
Yeah, for sure.
It's good. And then Matt Warner joins as CTO of Blumira. Thanks for joining, Matt.
Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to chat about lateral detection, especially in regard to honeypots. Lots of fun and interesting stuff around there. Well, if you find it all interesting, it's fun and interesting, really.
Sweet. So it should be a lot of fun. Feel free to make sure to chat. Also talk in the Q&A. I'm wondering where the chat went. I have Q&A. Oh, there's chat.
Yeah, there we go. I should probably pull Q&A too.
Someone mentioned Twitter, so I think they wanted me to post on Twitter the live stream. Hey, actually, LinkedIn posted Twitter, so we're good there. We got you covered. Just look up Patrick M. Garrity, I think, and you'll find the
yeah, I retweeted it as well.
Oh, sweet. We're on top of that thing. It's funny. Everyone's in different camps of social where they engage and how they engage, which is good. And Patrick Garrity, VP Operations at Blumira. I do everything, whatever needs to get done. And love just being in the security community. Previously worked at Duo. So cool. I'm gonna get rid of the slide sharing, and you're gonna see our lovely faces through this discussion. So yeah, I think one of the big things to kick off and start with is just more or less, what is lateral movement, and more or less, why should people care about it as it relates to security and things on their environment and their network?
You want to kick this off? You want me to take it?
Go for it.
All right. So for us, we look at lateral movement in a few different contexts. So Blumira, we collect a lot of data. We look at data from a few different aspects. And for us, for lateral movement, what we're looking for is, and what people define it as, is when people within those environments are connecting to other machines within that network through some sort of process that allows them to move laterally. So it could be through classically RDP, so remote desktop protocol. It could be over SMB. And there are a number of other protocols and other connections that allow you to move laterally. It could even be something as simple as a web connection if that machine is vulnerable and they can drop a web shell onto that target and allows them to move laterally within that environment. So for Blumira, we look at lateral movement from a few different aspects of not only what is that single point that it might hit, but also what kind of behaviors within those situations, what kind of behaviors within those protocols that allow people to move laterally can be seen, can be identified, and how do we want to perceive those within those environments? Because when people start moving laterally within your network, when those lateral connections can occur, a lot of risk can come with them if they aren't being handled and they aren't being tracked. So making sure that they can be tracked, they can be handled, what's happening, they're secure, what kind of is happening within your environment, all becomes really important when it comes to that lateral movement detection.
Yeah, so for us, lateral movement is interesting because it's almost why we built Canary. And so we had quite a few people in the company had a long history doing pen testing. And almost one of the universal truths of pen testing is you break into the network, you spend almost the length of your engagement on that network, you rifle through all the drawers, you escalate privileges, and a shockingly large amount of time, almost every engagement you're on, the customer only finds out about all of this carnage when you submit your report. And for years, information security has been trying to make sure they can absolutely stop you getting in. And that's still worth doing, and you should still harden stuff and still try it. But one of the big things that we keyed on was the fact that while there's a bazillion different ways that you can get in, identifying on lateral movement, honing in on lateral movement is pretty definable. There's some activities that you can spot. And again, if we go back to a phrase I used early on, which is a high leverage point, you can spend a lot of time locking all of your front doors, and then actually what bites you is there's a malicious insider who does something, or you harden all of your servers, but it's a phishing attack that gives them the initial foothold. And what you'll find is even if there's a bazillion ways for people to get in, once the attacker is in, if the attacker means business, they've got to go about a certain set of activities, which normally involves lateral movement. And that becomes a really easy time to spot badness. And so for us, the reason we focus so much on it is because we think it's one of those points where there's a lot of stuff that you'd like to do, but you can't. But if you were looking out for this lateral movement, it gives you a really high fidelity indication that there's badness that you need to jump in on.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Both of you coming from the pen testing side. I didn't come from that background. I more or less came from general IT. But I do think it's funny talking with both of you. It's in seeing customer after customer in their pen test, and the number one thing they never have in place is detection capabilities, period. And so they get some basic controls from a lot of times prevention perspective, but I think it's that detection perspective that is particularly interesting to me. And I think, what you're both talking about is the fact of getting something in that makes it without a ton of noise, an easy way to detect that lateral movement more or less is what you're honing in on, correct?
Yeah, so that thing is super interesting because if you've never done a pen test or if you've never been involved in an incident, it's one of those things that's hard to imagine what the world looks like when you're being attacked. If you ever go on one of these pen testing courses, like something that they don't discuss is like you're in this course and you're 3 days in and you're bouncing around this fake network and you're owning servers. And like at some point, what you should notice is that it just looks like a normal day to everyone else on the network. And people kind of underestimate that because you kind of think that when there's an attack, there's going to be flashing lights and scary theme music. But mostly it just looks like Thursday. And so one of the big problems that turns out to happen is you get this like APT activity that's happening, or this really about to be the worst week of your life activity happening on your network. And your network hums exactly the same way it always does, unless you've specifically got detection controls in. And most people figure that out too late. And that's why you can look at a network that's been up forever, do a red team exercise on it, and you'll own it 6 ways from Sunday. And most times the defenders don't even know you're there.
In some cases, you may find previous exploitation in that environment as well. Yeah, and Haroon brings up a very important point that we focus on heavily of there are linchpins that have to happen if someone wants to attack an environment. Certain things have to happen for people to be successful attacking your environment. And if you focus on resolving and getting visibility into those things, lateral movement, things that can happen to endpoints that have access into your environment. If you can kind of layer, of course, then we get back and talk about layer of security and all that good stuff. But if you can layer in and start to try to attack those linchpins and say, if someone's going to get into my environment and they want to move laterally, they can only do it these ways. Here are the ways that we can secure this. And realistically, you're never going to secure them perfectly. So how can you get detection in that environment? How can you see what's happening? Because it's a very good point. If you can see that it's happening, and you can see that it's happening in a way that it shouldn't be happening. So touching a honeypot is a great example. Behaviors are happening that haven't happened previously. You can get into the complex UEBA, user behavior stuff, blah, blah, blah. But then we can get into the deeper conversation of, are anomaly security issues? Generally, no. Should they always be security issues? Probably not. So then you get into context and you get into a much deeper kind of logical discussion around, well, what is the worry around lateral movement? How does it all kind of fit in? And really what it comes down to is exactly as Haroon said. These things have to happen for someone to be successful in your environment. A pen tester is going to get into your environment, an attacker is going to get into your environment and just randomly be successful. They have to move within that environment to be successful. And your environment needs to allow them to, which almost everyone's will. And therefore, your protection then is, all right, how can we see that this is happening?
Right.
Hey, so I'm going to launch a poll. And correct me if there's anything I'm missing, but more or less I'm saying, how does your organization detect lateral movement? Log monitoring, honeypots, user behavior analytics, we don't, or something else? Is there anything I'm missing on that list?
I think that's reasonable.
It's a good list, yeah. You don't want to make it too much bigger.
No, we might have some other ideas from the audience, right?
Yeah.
But hey, why not create an interactive poll because I didn't do my job ahead of time?
No, it's just doing it on the fly. It's a better way to do it. It's okay.
Yeah, that's today's by the seat of my pants. But I just did launch that poll so we can see everybody on the call how they're doing movement. And while we're getting that poll, and yeah, my assumption is my guess would be we don't is probably going to be one of the higher ones. How much of this weakness in defense is down to culture and reactive approach to InfoSec and the mindset for InfoSec?
Yeah, it's.
Hey, can I make a comment there?
Yeah, sure.
A lot of people aren't in InfoSec that are dealing with this problem. They're actually in IT.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think like that's part of it. But sorry, Go ahead, Haroon.
No, so my answers to this sort of stuff are normally terrible because the answers are vague sounding. It depends, and like for the most part, I think we've got a bunch of different reasons why we've got so many problems in InfoSec, and one of them is like some of the problems are technical, some of them are cultural. When it comes to detecting badness on networks. I really think that lots of it is technical. Like
Yeah.
it's one of those cases where I do think like we've just built networks without detection built in, and we've kind of ended up in a bad place where we've got several bad paradigms. Like you'll see pretty famously, right? Like you take any of the big exploit detection boxes, which are really smart technology, really clever people worked on it, and like you'll see this massive hack, like Target was hacked, and just months before the hack, they were advertising, both they and this vendor were advertising this new kit that they've got that generates alerts when attacks happen on their network. And so post the attack, people say, well, what happened? Weren't you running XYZ? And the answer is yes, they were. And XYZ was throwing off 300 alerts a day. And so they were just ignoring those alerts. And so at that point, like if you ask what failed there, was it culture that failed? Was it technology that failed? I think the answer is yes. Like both failed. Like culturally, they got used to a lot of noise. Technically, they got used to a solution that just generates alerts all day. And for the most part, like aside from buy Canary and use Canary, the big thing that that I would make a pitch for is that people look for high leverage activities. Like if you're going to do X and it's going to drown you in alerts, be realistic. You're not going to get to those alerts. Like make another plan. Try to look for things where you can score decisive victories and win.
Yeah, yeah. It's such a huge part of especially defensive security at this point, where the attackers are going to come in. They're going to make a bunch of noise if you're if you're trying to do detection, and if you have your detection set up in a way that isn't super curated, either for your environment or it's looking for really those lever points, you're only going to get blown up. And unless you and your team are the kind of people who can remember every single thing you see, and they can go back and say, oh, I know that thing that I saw 2 weeks ago is different than the thing that I saw today, which is, it's not a realistic thing to depend on, of course. It becomes impossible. And I mean, I can think of a number of situations in the history of my career where we will notify someone of something where it's like, this is a live threat. You need to look at this. This is a problem. You need to look. And it's really easy for the culture to fall back to, well, we're pretty sure this is a pen test, so we're just not going to worry about this today. And it's like, well, maybe this is not how you should approach this. This is not a good way to approach it. So you get a bunch of different kind of issues layered in, and I don't like to. The security industry has enough of people blaming people for not doing their jobs right, probably, and it's really more that none of us really have the right tools to facilitate what we need to do. Because realistically, if you're in a position where you're eating 300 alerts a day and you don't have a team big enough to handle that, which is a huge team, a team that almost no one has, you're basically just not doing defensive security anymore. You basically just decided, I'm not going to do this, but I can point at all this evidence when my board asks me if I'm doing this. It's a culture issue. It needs to be reworked, and I get why it happens. That happens. It's a natural thing to be like, oh, well, I'll fix it later. I'll worry about it later. But you got to work that structure. You got to work how that's fitting together, because those points, those lever points, those linchpins that you're going to hit, they're going to get hit by things that happen in your environment. If you're doing due diligence, scanning will hit them. If you're doing asset discovery, those will hit them. But making sure that you're working through that process and you're saying, all right, I know that our Canary is going to get triggered when we do vuln scanning. I'm going to whitelist it, or I'm going to be aware of it. I'm going to use it as my, like, all right, I know every other week I'm going to see this, so that's okay. But if I see it any other time, but then you have to have your whole team together on that same page of, I know that it's happening then, but not then. So it's a lot of making sure that you're organized, and organization's real tough for the security community, only because there's so much to do. It can be really hard to stop and be like, all right, how can we really approach this? And technically, I mean, if you don't have a segmented network and you're basically just throwing a bunch of stuff through just one broadcast, or it's going all through just your switching, and you're kind of just hoping that maybe you'll find it. We have a few things that we try, but honeypots are perfect for that kind of world. We do a lot of host-based like connections. So like Windows firewall is good to pull off of, because then we can detect lateral attempts across that broadcast. But in either case, unless you have really good logging set up, because how many people here have Windows firewalls enabled on their Windows machines? I'm going to go with probably 50 to 60%. And how many have logging set up of those who have that? Because you have to do a bunch of stuff to get that. It's a lot easier to set up a honeypot. It's a lot easier to kind of get your stuff structured so you can ingest those alerts and get honey tokens in place than it is to re-architect your environment. And I think a lot of us want that. This sounds worse than I intended to. The easy win for defensive security detection. We don't want the, well, how can I spend the next 12 months to get to that point so I can see the one thing? We want the honeypot kind of thing. We want what's going to get us that next level.
Hey, so going back to this is great. Going back to the poll, 55% of people said they do log monitoring to detect lateral movement. 9% honeypots, 9% user behavior analytics, and then 2%, or I'm sorry, 18% don't, and then 9% something else. Yeah, and I think as you're alluding to, Matt, it's like, yeah, a lot of times on the log monitoring side, the reality is like, there's multiple things that have to be done for it to work properly. You know, more or less, and that involves the endpoint configuration as well. And so by the default, it's going to require a ton more work, and you should do that. But a honeypot, as we're talking about in Haroon, essentially gives you an immediate quick win to detect some of the more common things that are probably going to show up within your network, right? Is that correct, Haroon?
Yeah, so I think, and I want to be careful about two things here. The one is I don't want to be an absolute show, just saying buy our stuff, and at the same time, I want to, like, there are certainly honeypot implementations that will suck, just like everything else. And yeah, and like one of the big dangers, like if we talk about looking for high leverage activities, like almost the perfect opposite of that, and InfoSec's full of them, are activities that end up being so demanding that the activity becomes your day job. And like I joke about it sometimes, but you know, it's the old story about like someone goes and their job is to drain the swamp, and they get there and the swamp is full of alligators. So they start fighting alligators. And after a while, you get so good at fighting alligators that you forget that your job was to drain the swamp. And InfoSec becomes full of this type of busy work, where you'll see people really busy with lots of activities that don't materially move the ball forward. It doesn't make people safer. It's just stuff that they've got to tick off and stuff that they've got to go do. And so even when it comes to honeypots, you want to make sure that that doesn't become your day job. Like I've seen deception companies literally ask people, like, you've now got to build a deception team that sits down there and creates deception stories and does all of this. Like, unless you in the deception business, like unless you in espionage or counter espionage for a living, like that's not what you want your people doing. Like actually what you want is drop it in, forget about it, tell me when bad stuff happens. And so for me, honeypots have a value if they can give you that. If I don't have to take care of them and spend all my time maintaining them and do all of this work, they're a super valuable thing to do. If they are starting to dominate your life, then it's no longer the high leverage you were promised on the tin. You should get your money back.
Yep. Hey, and this is a good question that ties to that. A friend Pascal is asking, and Pascal, by the way, we got to get you on one of these webinars. That's my ask to you. Aren't honeypots only as effective as the attackers are careless?
It's such a great question.
It is a good question. The first thing that comes to mind to me is like, most attacks out there are pretty careless in that they're just trying to get in, deploy ransomware, or do what they're going to do to try and make money, right? So it depends on the type of attack, right?
So I'll tell you, from my point of view, like I get this question a fair bit, and I can tell you I'm completely unashamed in terms of on Team Honeypot, and I'll tell you why. Like, so I did pen testing for a long time, and like we ended up breaking into really nice, like when you're doing network penetration testing, really nice networks like around the world, really nice companies, and almost all of the really epic hacks, the ones we still talk about at the office, where we did great damage or where we broke into really hard targets, the final hack was death by 1,000 cuts. Like, the reason we owned that network was because we owned a box here that had creds to a network there, that got us an Excel file that gave us creds for the network there, that eventually opened up a share that eventually gave us all of the crown jewels. And that wasn't isolated. Like we did hardcore red teaming I did for about a decade. And most great hacks were that series of death by 1,000 cuts. And what that means is that people way underestimate how much good attackers will bounce around your networks, to the point where when we first built Canary, we made it so that it really hides well on the network. So if you tell it to be a Cisco, it'll run Cisco services, it'll have a Cisco MAC, it'll have a Cisco TCP/IP stack address. But I can tell you instances where I owned a strange looking box that didn't look like it belonged at all on the network. Like, the network is full of Windows machines, and here's a Solaris box with our services still running. And I owned it. And then on it, you find a half-written LDAP file with creds that let you onto the network, because they were using it to manage the telephony service or manage their NAS backup. And what's interesting is when you look at honeypots in isolation, like if you look at it academically, you kind of say, well, I wouldn't touch that strange looking Solaris box because it doesn't fit in with the rest of the network. And in truth, I've owned dozens of networks by attacking that box that doesn't fit in, that somebody forgot they half installed. And so mainly what I'm saying is we overestimate what attackers won't, this is such a double negative. We overestimate what attackers won't touch. If you've got something on your network, and if I've got objectives on your network, careless or not careless, I've got to touch stuff. One of the things that we always talk about, like if you take one of our Canary tokens, we'll give you a valid set of AWS API creds. And so you put it on your CFO's machine, your CEO's machine, your domain controller. And if an attacker breaks onto your CFO's machine and now sees AWS API creds, there's a chance he says, wait, the CFO won't have API creds. There's a chance he says, no, these guys are not an AWS shop. But I'm willing to bet almost any attacker worth his salt who sees AWS API creds has to go, let me test these creds. Because you don't know how they ended up on the CFO's machine, but potentially it's access to this company's entire cloud, entire infrastructure. I've got to try it. And the moment you try it, you get your message telling you, hey, the key that was on your CFO's machine, someone just used it to try to log in. So it's super high fidelity. And as an attacker, well, look, we've been running Canary since 2016. And when we started it, we had some people question to say, like, I'm not sure an attacker would really touch this. I'm not sure. Like, at this point, we can say pretty empirically, we've caught red teamers from almost every good red team in the world. You've caught state-sponsored hackers. The stuff just works because attackers just have to touch it.
Yeah, 100% agreed. It's one of those areas where it seems like attackers would avoid it because it's a honeypot, and why they of course they would just avoid the honeypot, but you naturally have to look around that environment. You naturally need to identify targets, and you naturally have to find out if you can exploit those targets and find indicators to move forward with that environment. So to take a step back as an attacker and not touch a box, for one, it means you've already touched that box to the extent that you've identified what services are running, what it is, which means that the honeypot is already caught you, so it doesn't almost matter at that point. You get more information, of course, if they start to interact with the honeypot, but what it allows us to do, and realistically what honeypots allow you to do, is get that really, a really high fidelity alert, because you know someone is trying to touch this thing that someone shouldn't be touching, and they have to touch it because they need to identify what it is. I've never seen an attacker avoid a honeypot because they don't want to, is what it comes down to. They don't know that the honeypot's in this /24 at this place. All they know is, I know there's some interesting stuff in that /24, so I want to know what's there, and then I want to try to get into it. And the only way to do that is to touch that box to figure out what it is, to see if I can get further. So what a honeypot's allow you to do is, if you move that up forward and you say, all right, I want to know, and I know I think Canary does this, I want to know if someone is port scanning this honeypot and then starts to interact with it. If you see that chain, then you know, well, someone is actually interacting with, someone's attacking in my environment, someone is trying to get into this box that they thought was strange. Because yeah, it's not surprising that someone has an old Mitel or an HPUX on their network that they just left there, and they're like, yeah, whatever, it's fine. And it's very easy to convince people who want information to try to get more information, is really what it comes down to, because there's a lot of benefit to it if it succeeds.
Hey, on this,
there's an interesting side effect that happens there that's completely not planned for. And it's also something that we didn't think about originally. And we were curious, like would people want to say they were running honeypots on their network? Should they say they're running it? And one of the interesting things that you'll see from conversation is, if we were doing a pen test and I said we owned all these networks by finding odd machines on their network and then owning them, what happens if you tell me ahead of time, hey, actually these guys are running honeypots? Well, now what it means is I'm scared to touch that HPX box or that Solaris box, because now I think maybe that's the honeypot. And so an interesting side effect, like almost like a beware of the dog sign, like even if you're not running honeypots, like just telling attackers you run honeypots, in a bunch of instances just adds to their pain. So we've got a place on our site, like canary.tools/love, where people tweet about like interactions with Canary or Canary tokens. And there's a pretty famous pen tester who says, like, since Canary tokens have started getting used more often, now whenever he finds creds during an engagement, he's scared to use them. And so effectively, like literally, don't pay us a cent. Just put up a sign saying that you're running Canary. And now when attackers find anything on your network, they're scared to actually use it to go further into your network because they think they might be tripping a honeypot. So if the objective is to increase attacker cost, you can literally get it just by making people think you're running honeypots, even if you aren't.
Hey, so this gets me to my next poll that I just created, because I think it's kind of funny. I came after Duo getting acquired by Cisco, right? And everyone always touts network segmentation, network segmentation, network segmentation. I think we all know the reality is like, at least from my experience, being on calls with customers day in and day out, most organizations, especially as small and medium-sized businesses, have very little, if any, segmentation in place. Right. So I'm going to launch a poll. How do you currently segment your network? I don't segment my network, but I have a firewall. I have basic network segmentation. I have micro segmentation, or I don't know. So we'll launch that now, and we can talk more about segmentation. There are some good questions, right? So Pascal agreed. Often scanning the box is an indication someone is acting malicious. And then Scott asked, and this is I always laugh because this is one of my favorite questions. Machine learning, AI, deep learning. How does machine learning, supervised, unsupervised deep learning impact the detection process? And I'll let you guys take this, but first off, like from my experience, I think a lot of people get distracted with this idea that like, oh, now this self-learning thing is going to solve all my problems. is like my biggest observation in the security space. I think this has been going on for years. Not that it can't help or augment, right? But it doesn't necessarily solve the problem on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So go for it.
So we hear, or I hear this question fairly often here at Blue Mira. I'm gonna try to answer this in the most direct way possible. So for us, machine learning is a maybe later kind of thing, and there's a real important reason for that. So especially in regard to lateral movement, especially in regard to honeypots, when you're talking about defensive security, when you're talking about log monitoring, you're talking about just getting through the day and making sure you're not getting hacked. Machine learning is a dangerous tool to layer into there because it's loud. There's very little context outside of whatever features you attach to that machine learning data set. And it can tell you information that isn't really relevant to a threat, but it's relevant to an anomaly in your environment. So you need to continuously train, you need to continuously build those data sets, you need to keep kind of improving and structuring that data. Because realistically, the data that you send to Splunk, the data that you send to Keyrate, the data you send to anywhere is not structured in a way that's necessarily useful for machine learning that's going to give you good insight. And even if it was, you need to do a lot of work to train it in a way that's useful to get good, robust insights out of it. And realistically, when you talk about the amount of effort that's required to be successful with machine learning and security, which everyone's going to talk about it, we've all seen people talking about it. 95% of them, they act like they built the next strong AI that's going to take over the world, but realistically, it's like 3 different things. Like it can detect different petals and flowers, but that's about all it can do. And when you talk about defensive security, that's not what 95% of us want. What we want is real alerts about real attacks that they can do something about. And you probably want to know when there's something insecure in your environment that you can fix as well, and things to do to move forward. When you start talking about ML and UVA starts to fall into this as well, you can very quickly get into a rut of noise and of non-contextual alerting, where it's just kind of like, well, a bunch of stuff happened. Good luck figuring it out. And that's a really dangerous place to be without a lot of basically investigative structure behind it. So you can say, all right, I know this user tried to log into that place and it's never happened before. Is that a problem? And if the answer is yes, then okay, well, now what? And now if you're a 20,000 person company and that happens 150 times a day, now how are you going to handle that? So it gets dangerous without context, is my answer to that. But it can be useful, it can be important. It does require a really robust framework to be built around it. And really, it should really be all feeding into that high fidelity alerting where it's like, here's something actually is happening, which is built by some context here. It should never be the wishy-washy, maybe go look kind of thing.
Yeah, it's so super seductive. It's seductive on 2 levels, right? On the one level, it's a salesman's dream because every salesman peddling something with ML gets to say it like it's a new concept. Like everyone's looking for something bad, but we don't do that. We just look at everything and then tell you when something's different. And he says it like he's really got this great insight. And really, people have been having this insight since the 80s, right? Like that stuff's not new. And exactly what happens is you end up being in training mode and you train forever. And there's 2 things that we say a lot to people, like specifically with what we do, because we prime for just add ML and we specifically don't. And like we openly tell people that we are like if you go to the RSA floor, we are the dumbest solution there. Like literally dumb as a pile of bricks. Like and that's what we aim for. Like so stupid, so simple, and works. And we're not trying to be super smart. It's like, hey, listen, somebody's talking to me and trying to log into me, even though I shouldn't exist and I shouldn't be here. Like it's not easy to make a mistake like that. And we actually super optimize in the opposite direction. So we have some things that we could flag on. Like if we take the example of saying you were Cisco, like early on, we'd listen for TFTP and we'd talk good TFTP to people. And what you'd find is on tons of networks, there's just so much TFTP or SNMP traffic going up and down that it's not a reliable indicator of badness. And so we'll just take it out. Like we don't think that we've seen any attacks that were only on SNMP that didn't also try to hit something else. And so I really think the danger you bump into is, again, dropping down technology that you end up working for. And so our pitch to customers right now is you should go try that AI thing, if ML thing, if someone sold you on it. You're going to go through a deployment phase and a learning phase and an enforcement phase. And I promise you, like we've engineered Canary to take 3 minutes to set up. So spend 10K and drop 10 canaries in the next 20 minutes, and then go do all that other stuff. Because that other stuff's going to be a 1 year or 2 year project. And while it happens, you probably want to know when there's badness on your network. So literally our pitch, and again, I'm not saying this just as a buy Canary thing. I'm saying it as the stuff you should be going for is, what can I do now that improves my position now, while these long running bets may or may not pay off? Like sure, I buy it. You want to go try that project? You want to go do a DLP project? I buy it. Maybe you're the one guy who gets it right on your network. While you're doing that thing, do the stuff that'll work today. Put that stuff in place.
Are you saying DLP doesn't work?
It probably does. I've just not seen.
In theory, it can work. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's a good idea if you've classified your data. Like everybody dives into it with the little asterisk that says like, first classify your data.
Exactly. Yeah.
And nobody classifying their data.
First do the most time consuming step, and then you can do that.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, yeah, my philosophy has always been the same. And I think like, it's kind of funny, like previously I was at Duo, kind of the same. 2-factor authentication is pretty dumb. It's, I mean, and I don't mean that negatively, right? But it's like, all right, send you a push or a text and you respond yes or no, or type in a code. Like that's pretty much the extent, and it's a really good security control. I think as in where Bluemere fits in is like the logging aspect, I think is the aspect that we're talking about a lot of times as well, that can be extremely complicated. And similar theory on the Bluemere side, which is like people just don't have the time to parse logs and look at logs. And relatively speaking, right, if you build the technology right from an integration perspective, like we're able to get a lot of the noise of alerts and logs, out and surface the things that actually matter. And, that's what's, I mean, to me, it's like, that's what's interesting from a security perspective, is applying those principles that like, hey, it gets to value quickly, right, and doesn't take, 1, 2, 3 years to actually get that value. So, hey, Brian, this one's on the spot. And I think we talked about this before this call. So I'm kind of laughing at the question. And I think it goes to show it's like, in Bluemere, we use Open Canary on our sensors. So at least there's some aspect of like lateral movement detection, but that's much different than the full aspect of honeypots and honey tokens with Canary. Open Canary is the open source part of your project, correct, Tarun?
Yep.
And his question was, hey, do we integrate from a connectivity parsing and alert perspective, right? And I think the answer is, we talked about it, it's like, hey, let's do the webinar and talk about these things. We're both on the same page, and there's value to Bluemere customers and considering tokens and more advanced honeypots.
And we totally would, because like Canaries export like syslog API. So we've got like Splunk integration, QRadar integration. So just about anything with the dashboard will be able to ingest Canary alerts.
Yeah, I didn't realize you had syslog, so that's something we can ingest now, right?
Yep,
if you throw towards us. So cool. Should have had that answer more prepared. Thanks for asking it, Brian.
We can just act like we did.
Yeah, and I think that so the aspect of the honey the question first off. So network segmentation, I think everyone's ashamed to answer what's real, which is I don't currently segment my network. Sorry if I ashamed you for that one. But yeah, it just looks like people mark basic network segmentation or micro segmentation, and those aren't really well-defined words either. So I probably could have asked those differently next time. And then 27% say I don't know. I think outside the network though, right? It's you start looking at the cloud applications and services. And I think there's some aspects of like detecting, lateral movement that becomes interesting. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about like the honey token concept, right? And where the value is as it relates to those honey tokens.
Yeah, so we huge fans of honey tokens. And again, in an attempt to not sound like a complete shill, if you folks go to canarytokens.org, like we've got a Canary token server there that literally gives you honey tokens, and you can just use them straight off the internet. And so we've got something like I think the last time I checked, like half a million people who've deployed Canary tokens. And if you look at those tokens, part of the joy is that firstly, there's quite a bunch of them. So you can create like a HTTP token, which is just a vanilla web bug, which is here's a URL. If someone visits this URL, we'll tell you that they did. Super straightforward. Or we'll say, hey, here's a DNS name. If anyone looks up this host name, we'll tell you that they did. And if you take those as the simplest form of if someone does this, we'll tell you, you can then start getting really complex tokens, like if anybody views this image, if anybody opens this PDF, if anybody opens this Word doc, and you can go all the way down to if anybody copies this website, if anybody uses this AWS API key, if anyone uses the Slack API key. And so if you look at traditional honeypots as here's a fake system or here's a fake machine, Canary tokens or honey tokens give you tripwires that you can start putting into things. So you can tripwire your SaaS app or tripwire your Slack or tripwire access to a folder. And again, part of the reason, in all honesty, that we give it away completely free is because conceptually it's more complicated. That doesn't mean it's more complicated to use. I mean, like realistically, we're a small company, and selling canaries is dead simple. Hey, this is an easy thing, drop it and it works. Dropping Canary tokens gives you as much value, but the story is more complicated. And so really it's a chance for smart security teams to just pounce on it. And we've got some customers who deploy 30,000 Canary tokens on their network. One customer with, I think, over 100,000 Canary tokens on their network. Because again, it's free and it's literally high quality, high fidelity alerting. So if you, whether you're a Broomera customer or not, whether you're a Canary customer or not, you should go check out canarytokens.org. There'll be pages that it links to for how you can use some of those tokens. You absolutely should. It's a no-brainer. Really, really useful at the low price of $0.
They're fun. It's fun. I mean, I think it's fun. I've been there myself, and it's like, yeah, you grab a DNS token or an AWS token, or I don't know, Office 365 Word doc token, something of that nature.
Yep.
It is a fun, like, just go do it, kick the tires around type of solution. Hey, so this is, I want to keep in mind, this is a salesperson question, but I'm gonna try and reframe the question, because I think it's a little bit confusing. But how do honeypots? I think this is the right way to ask this question. I think it's relevant to security folks, but how do honeypots tie to something like the MITRE ATT&CK framework?
Yes.
They were related to some tactics, I suppose.
Yeah. So,
or techniques.
So I'm not sure if you want to grab this, Matt. So I've specifically stayed away heavily from the MITRE framework, and not because I I think the guys at the folks at MITRE are doing really good work. The reason why I kind of let out a deep sigh is the moment the framework came out and the moment Shield came out, just about every vendor uh, rushed to put out a blog post on how they map to the MITRE frameworks. And now what vendors are doing is playing a game of bingo to say we map to 32 of the 72 controls on the framework. And I think that whole thing is a little bit wrong-minded. So the short answer is Honeypots map heavily. Like recently, MITRE have released what they call Shield, which is plays specifically into defensive tactics. But like for me as a person who sells Canary, we really don't pitch Honeypots in that light. We pitch it as like if you want to know when badness is happening, you want to go do this. And yeah, I'm a terrible salesperson.
No, I mean, yeah, we are in a slightly different place because we are more broad, so MITRE starts to come into play for us a bit more. However, I'm probably going to speak slightly out of turn here, and that I feel similarly about MITRE. It's really easy for people who don't write the MITRE attack framework and understand it inside and out to look at it and be like, I need to do everything on that list, yeah, exactly. And that's a really dangerous game to play because it's not actually necessary for you to have a secure organization. There are a number of things you should do to be a secure organization, but being able to cover the entire MITRE attack framework and how it maps to Shield is not necessary for your environment. So yeah, I mean, honeypots end up mapping to certain components of MITRE because lateral movement is just one of the techniques that's associated with the MITRE attack framework. But its mapping is one of those things of, yeah, it maps to a few areas, but really what you care about is the fidelity of the alerting that comes out of it and things like it more than you care about how it's going to fit in because, I mean, it has a lot to do with initial access and how people are moving around your environments, but it doesn't really matter for the like fifth part and the technique 30 of 8,000. No, I mean, it probably doesn't. What you're looking for is specific coverage for your environment.
Yeah, I think it's a good framework. I think like it's also an overwhelming framework.
Yes.
There's just so much that you can easily feel overwhelmed as a person to say, how can I ever accomplish, especially when you're a small or medium-sized business, right? Like it's just not feasible to check all those boxes. And so it's like, well, the other aspect is like, which ones are actually most important? And I think that is one aspect that comes more into play is it's like, well, what should I actually, yeah, you should have a firewall in place, right? You should be doing endpoint detection. You should have some honeypots. You should be doing some level of detection through logging, right? And that's I think what's more important. And trying to do that at least baseline effectively. Two-factor authentication in place. I don't know. I'm just throwing some different base level controls out there. But no, this is great. I did ask if there's any other last comments or questions. We have a few more minutes. Is there any, we have 7 more minutes. Is there anything else you guys want to add as it relates to, honeypot detections and like anything to look out for as far as like, actually, I think this is funny, like common mistakes. Like I did have someone last week where they're like, I deployed your honeypot sensor and they're like, I deployed it in the DMZ. And I was like, oh, no. Like, so there is this misconception of like honeypots publicly facing versus on your internal network. And I think for the most part, what we're talking about here is deploying them on your internal network where the value is, right?
Yeah. So yeah, for ways to get it wrong, it would be dropping it where it's exposed to the internet, and kind of getting used to. Matt mentioned earlier, like people have internal scanners, and so their scanners are touching their honeypot every week, and we are really big fans of reaching out to people and saying, hey, listen, don't do that. Like if that's going to happen, like let's add it to an ignore list. Let's either tell your scanner to ignore it or let's tell the Canary to ignore it, because like I think in InfoSec, people are a little bit, so dishonest is a strong word. I think we lie to ourselves. We've often had conversations with people like that, and the person says like, no, I wanted to get hit by an alert every day so that I know when it's not working. And you look at them and you can almost guarantee that that's how alert blindness works. Like, no, you will not notice if it stops alerting for a week, because that's not how your brain works. Like, your brain will just miss that this thing is happening. And so what we really try to nudge people towards is a case where it's silent, and the day it chirps is the day you go out and look at it. And I think that there's lots of things that can be set up to work that way. Silent by default until you've got to get out and check why it's not silent. I think someone squeezed in another.
Good advice.
question.
There is, someone wants to see what our Canary system will look like. I'll show in a sec, just really quick. The other thing I think we talked about was, hey, I just need one honeypot and I'll just connect it to every one of my networks internally. And I think we talked about with the fact that like that honeypot gets popped and then they have access to anywhere on the network. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So and again, I'll talk about us specifically. Like we spend a stupid amount of time trying to make sure we're not the security vendors we hated when we were, well, loved when we were pen testing. And by that I mean, like famously, Mudge said like 20 years ago that typically a security device is not a secure device. And so if you're doing pen testing on a network, like find an old Trend Micro box, find like these boxes are old PHP boxes running Perl, and you can own them and you can do bad stuff with them. And so we spend a lot of time making sure that if you own a Canary, you're not in a better place than you were before you owned the Canary. So firstly, it should be really hard to do. Like you shouldn't be able to compromise it. But if you did, it shouldn't put you in a better place than you were before you compromised it. And so we make a whole bunch of design decisions around it. One of them being we won't straddle multiple networks, because anytime there's a box that's multi-hosted, multi-homed, what an attacker is going to do is he's going to attack that and then use it to hop across VLANs or network segments. And so instead we make Canaries cheap enough or simple enough so that you can just drop multiples without thinking about them, because we don't want to be that point of weakness on your network.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, and Blumira handles that similarly. We don't limit the amount of sensors because we want people to just put them everywhere.
Lots of places, right?
Yeah, it's easy to do, and why not do it? And yes, please don't put it in your DMZ and then use all the data to try to block everyone attacking. You'll never stop people scanning you. It will not stop. Don't try to stop it. Just make sure you're secure.
Hey, so I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen for a moment. I'm just gonna show an example honeypot detection, and this is the first time too we have our new front end UI look, so people are gonna see that as well.
Neat.
And then I'll summarize it up, but just want to show. Responder dashboard. Here's an example of like an alert. You know, in this instance, it's called Fake Citadel, I think after Star Wars. But example of, you know, I can grab this, it says the information, what action needs to be taken. And then down below, we have matched evidence of the access, right? The user as well, that's accessing the honeypot, for example. So hopefully that's helpful. And then the other thing I think, you know, super important features of a product. We also have dark mode now.
Very big, yes.
Focusing on the main thing.
Exactly.
The important things, right? Got to get people excited. So, hey, thanks, Haroon, for hopping on. We had before I summarize, right? Haroon from Thinks Canary. The Canary tokens are a great thing to check out, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But and then there's a few more questions. But on the Blumira side, just want to recap, and then we can answer any other outstanding questions. Blumira is designed to enable IT and security teams with effective detection and response. The concept is to be able to deploy in hours. Limit noise associated a lot of times with other products from a detection perspective. And when I say that, we also ingest alerts from other products and hone in on the things that don't actually provide security value, and then helping automate response or provide playbooks on actions of what to actually do. And what I would say is like how this works is essentially we integrate with a ton of different products, almost anything within a customer's environment. We automate ingestion, parsing, prioritization, detection, and reporting, service threats, and then either take action from an automated perspective or provide a playbook on what to do. And then as far as the roundtable next week, we have Arlie from Brawnability. And he's going to talk, and Mike Behrman talking about running lean security operations teams, which should be a really, really fun conversation and topic for everyone. I did get, so one more question. Do Canary tokens work in G Suite? Absolutely. That's a really fun use case to play around with, actually. So you should do it. And then, hey, Haroon, do you want to add anything as far as like overview? We talked a bit about Canary Thinks product, but is there anything else you want to add there?
Nope. So yeah, like I said, try Canary tokens. They're totally free. Canary.tools is the rest of us. Drop me a message on Twitter. We'll be happy to chat.
Sweet. Thanks
so
so much for taking the time. This is a lot of fun. What time is it?
Thank you.
9 o'clock, 9 p.m.
Oh man, have a good night.
Yeah, have a good night, man.
Bye, folks. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.